Welcome to Taste of Revenge. If you're into cold revenge and dark justice, hit that subscribe and like button. This story will haunt you.
They called me a disgrace. Not in private. In front of my students, my colleagues, the principal. And I said nothing. My name is Isaac. I'm 41 years old. 17 years ago, I was a high school literature teacher. I had just finished grading a stack of midterm essays when it happened. The principal walked into the teacher's lounge, looked at me like I didn't belong, and said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Why is this man still here?" That was it. No explanation, no warning, just a sentence. I remember the silence that followed. No one stood up for me. Not my department head. Not the math teacher I shared tea with every morning. Not even my favorite student, who overheard it while walking past the door. That evening, I walked home with my hands shaking inside my coat pockets. The cold didn't matter, I kept replaying the moment in my head. I didn't sleep much that night. When my daughter Mira, just 5 years old, hugged me the next morning and asked, "Why are your eyes red, Baba?" I smiled and told her I was just tired. But something had cracked. Not shattered. Not yet. Just cracked. They will forget, I told myself. But you won't. That was 2008. The day I realized I was invisible to the very system I had served with loyalty. So I left. I didn't make a scene. I didn't send emails or demand apologies, I just left. Quietly, respectfully, as they expected me to. But inside, I was writing a different story. One no one else could read. Not yet. The first thing I did was enroll in a software development course. People laughed. "You're a literature guy," they said. "What are you doing with code?" I didn't answer. I read quietly. I watched lectures. I practiced every night when Mira went to sleep. Then I took a finance course. Then a course in behavioral psychology. I started following obscure YouTube channels about power dynamics. I read every book on leverage, manipulation, and long-game strategy I could find. I wasn't chasing revenge out of anger anymore. It had evolved. This was about balance. About justice delayed, not denied. I stopped introducing myself as a teacher. I told people I was in transition. No one asked what that meant, and I liked it that way. By 2010, I had developed 3 small income streams. Nothing fancy, freelance writing gigs, digital lessons, a couple of side hustles. But they kept me afloat. And more importantly, they kept me unattached. No boss. No system. No one to kneel to. Mira grew up fast. She was bright, kind, curious. She never knew what happened in that teacher's lounge. I never told her. Because I didn't want her to inherit my bitterness. I wanted her to inherit my discipline. For 17 years, I lived quietly. No social media. No unnecessary contact. I moved twice, changed my number 3 times. But every year, on the same day, October 12th, I'd sit down at my desk and write a letter, addressed to no one, signed with no name. Each letter ended with the same sentence: "You will remember me." By 2015, I was earning more than I ever did as a teacher. It wasn't glamorous. No luxury cars, no Instagram lifestyle. Just freedom, quiet, powerful freedom. I built anonymous websites that taught exam strategies, sold digital products under fake names, wrote ghost content for people I'd never meet. And through it all, I watched. I watched them, the ones who left me behind. Some climbed higher. That principal, for example, he became head of the district, started giving TED Talks on leadership and education. He smiled for cameras, shook hands with politicians, wrote opinion pieces on integrity. I read every word. Not out of hate, out of fascination. You see, people think revenge is driven by rage. But rage fades. disappointment hardens, and mine had aged like steel in the cold. So I started building something, a network. It started with a former student, let's call him Miles. He messaged me one day, said he was lost, said he didn't know what to do with his life. I helped him, quietly, no praise needed. He ended up working in school administration 2 years later. I kept helping. 2 became 5. 5 became 12. Students, colleagues, even strangers. I helped them all. And in return, they gave me something far more valuable than money: access. By 2019, I had people in 10 different schools. Not powerful people, not yet, but people with eyes, people with ears. I learned things: whispers, contracts, promotions, scandals. The kind of things that don't make it into the newsletters. I wasn't looking for blackmail. I was looking for patterns. And I found one. The principal, let's call him Graham, was running a private consultancy on the side. Technically legal, ethically questionable. Especially when he funneled students from public schools into his private prep courses using insider info. It wasn't criminal, but it was ugly. And it gave me the opening I needed. So I built a website. A professional, clean, data-driven platform that exposed the flaws in the education consultancy system. No names. No accusations. Just cold, hard statistics. Just enough to make someone sweat. It went viral in niche circles. Teachers shared it. Journalists bookmarked it. And the first crack appeared. A regional newspaper published an article titled, "Conflict of Interest in District Leadership?" Graham didn't flinch. He denied it all. Of course he did. He'd survived worse. But I wasn't done. Because now, for the first time in 17 years, he remembered me. How do I know? He called Miles. Asked him, casually, if he knew where I was. If I was still around. If I'd ever gotten over what happened. Miles lied. Beautifully. Said he hadn't spoken to me in years. That was the first time in nearly 2 decades that Graham said my name out loud. It felt good. Not like triumph. More like the first breath after being underwater too long. But this wasn't about Graham anymore. This was about the system. The quiet rot. The subtle, smiling cruelty that punished good teachers for being inconvenient. I wanted them to feel it. Not as a bomb. As a slow, rising tide. One they couldn't escape. By 2020, I had gathered enough leverage to shift from passive observer to active disruptor. Not by shouting. Not by accusing. But by placing people exactly where they didn't want to be under a microscope. I started a weekly email newsletter. Pseudonym, An Insider's Eye. Format, anonymous interviews, blind testimonies, subtle statistics. The stories came pouring in. Teachers afraid to speak up. Students pressured into tutoring contracts they couldn't afford. Whistleblowers silenced. Burnout masked as underperformance. I never used names. But everyone inside the system recognized the shadows. Especially Graham. One morning, my phone rang. A private number. I didn't answer. A voicemail followed. His voice was slower now, less arrogant. "Look, I don't know if you're behind this, but if you are, you've made your point. Let's move on. People are getting nervous." He sounded tired. It thrilled me. But I didn't reply. Because this wasn't about making a point. This was about returning what was taken. Not just from me. From every burned-out teacher. From every silenced voice. From every child who believed in fairness and then saw it rot. So I waited. Because I knew the real fire wasn't public scandal. It was doubt. Quiet, creeping, uncontrollable doubt. And then the audit came. A regional education board announced a surprise investigation into consultancy practices, triggered, supposedly, by a collection of, quote, anonymous concerns. They didn't name my platform. They didn't have to. Everyone knew where the fuel had come from. Graham held a press conference, tried to spin it as a positive opportunity for transparency, but his eyes told a different story. They darted, twitched, looked past the cameras like they were searching for ghosts. And I was one. In the background. Nowhere and everywhere. The teacher who vanished. The silence that returned. I booked a hotel near the district office. Just for one day. I didn't need to be seen. I just needed to stand within range of his collapse. I sat in the cafe across the street and watched from behind a newspaper. He walked by twice, on the phone, gesturing sharply. His gait had changed. Faster, more defensive, like a man walking through fog, unsure what's ahead but certain it's not good. I sipped my tea and let him pass. Then I stood up and left, without ever making contact. I wasn't here for confrontation. I was here to witness the echo. The same way he once stood over me in a room full of people and made me small. Now the whole building watched him shrink, not because of a scream, but because of pressure. Silent, growing, irreversible pressure. By the end of the week, 2 middle-level administrators resigned. A third was reassigned. A whisper war began inside the system. People didn't know who was behind it, but they all started behaving differently. Less smug, less corrupt. Like the walls had ears now. And I became a myth. Students whispered about the blog. Teachers passed it around on flash drives, afraid to be tracked. One headline read, "Is there a watchdog in the system?" There was. And he was very, very patient. Spring of 2023. 17 years had passed. Mira was now in her final year at university. Bright, principled, and everything I had hoped she'd become, unbroken by the world's cruelty. She still didn't know. Not about Graham. Not about the plan. Not about the shadow I had worn like armor for almost 2 decades. She didn't need to. She had lived free. That was enough. But I wasn't done. The system hadn't collapsed. It had adapted. It wore cleaner suits now, spoke with softer voices, but the rot was still underneath. So I made a final move. Not to destroy, to immortalize. I compiled every story I had. The files, the emails, the hidden recordings, the timelines. Every breadcrumb that led back to that room in 2008. Every thread that connected one arrogant decision to the suffering of hundreds. And I wrote a book. Not under my name. Not yet. Just a manuscript. Titled, The Quiet Classroom: How Systems Erase the Ones Who Care Most. I self-published. Limited release. Niche channels. No ads. And then I did the unthinkable. I mailed a copy, personally, hand-wrapped, to Graham. No return address. No signature. Just a single sticky note on the cover. It read, October 12th, I remember. 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. Again. I answered. Silence. Then a breath. Then his voice, older now, cracked. You win. Is that what you want to hear? I didn't respond. He continued. I don't even remember what I said to you that day. I've made mistakes, I admit it. But this, 17 years, this is obsession. I waited a beat, then answered, calm and sharp. No obsession is when the wound stays open. I healed mine by turning it into a mirror. You just never liked what you saw in it. Silence again. Then he said something I didn't expect. You were a good teacher, maybe the best we had. I didn't know how to deal with people like you, I still don't. And I felt something surprising. Not satisfaction. Not glee. Just release. Because finally, the ghost had spoken back. I hung up, blocked the number, and walked away from the phone. The book didn't make headlines, but it made waves. Slow, meaningful, permanent waves. A journalist from an education reform site picked it up, did a piece, then another. Teachers started quoting it during strikes, policy discussions, workshops. And I disappeared again. Not out of fear, out of completion. Today, I run a small bookstore in a quiet town by the coast. I drink my tea slowly, watch the sun rise late. No one knows who I used to be. No one needs to. Every now and then, a young teacher walks in, burned out, tired, almost ready to quit. And I hand them a copy of the book, free of charge, with a smile. I don't need thanks. I don't need recognition, because I know what it feels like to burn and never be seen. And I know what it means to return, not to punish, but to correct. That was my revenge. Not violence, not exposure, remembrance. Because the system forgot me once, but it will never forget me again.
If that hit you deep, imagine what's coming next.
Subscribe, like, and welcome to Taste of Revenge,